When your wife whispers another man's name beside you in the dark, what do? Pretend you didn't hear it? Or make sure she never forgets that you did? This is the story of Mark, a man who thought he knew his marriage until 3 words shattered everything he believed about love, loyalty, and the woman sleeping next to him. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit that hype button to boost this episode, and drop a comment below with your city or country. I'm always curious where you're watching from. Now let's get into it. It was a Tuesday night. Nothing special, nothing out of the ordinary, the kind of night that blends into every other night when you've been married for 8 years. Mark lay in bed beside his wife, Emma, the way he had thousands of times before. The mattress dipped slightly under her weight. The rhythm of her breathing created a familiar soundtrack to his half-sleep. The blanket they'd bought together 3 years ago lay draped across them both, and above, the ceiling fan hummed its endless rotation, stirring the stale air of their bedroom. Their bedroom? The words felt strange suddenly, like they belonged to someone else's life. Mark's eyes were closed, his mind drifting in that space between waking and dreaming, when he heard it. A whisper, soft, barely louder than the rustle of sheets, but clear enough to pierce through the fog of near sleep and stop his heart cold. I should have married Bryan. 5 words. That's all it took. 5 words to shatter 8 years of marriage. Mark's eyes snapped open. His entire body went rigid, every muscle locking in place like he'd been struck by lightning. The darkness of the room pressed in around him, suddenly oppressive, suddenly suffocating. For a moment, a desperate, hopeful moment, he thought he'd imagined it. A trick of the mind, a fragment of a dream bleeding into reality. Your brain plays games when you're half asleep, right? It creates sounds, whispers, entire conversations that never happened. But then he saw it, the faint blue glow of her phone screen casting ghostly light across her face. And the smile. God, that smile. That small, secret, private smile he hadn't seen in years. Maybe ever. Not directed at him anyway, not for him, never for him. His chest tightened like someone had wrapped steel bands around his ribs and was slowly, methodically squeezing. The air felt thick, heavy, like trying to breathe underwater. He lay perfectly still, not daring to move, not daring to breathe too loudly, pretending to be asleep while his mind exploded into 1,000 fragmented questions. Did she know he heard? Was she awake? Was she texting someone? Was she texting him? Bryan. The name echoed in his skull like a gunshot in an empty room, like a death knell, like the sound of something precious hitting the ground and shattering into irreparable pieces. Bryan. Bryan wasn't just anyone. He wasn't some random guy from her past. He was Mark's old college roommate, his best friend, the guy who'd helped him move into his first apartment, the guy who'd introduced him to Emma in the first place, the man who'd stood beside him at his wedding as his best man, grinning and clapping him on the back, saying, "You're a lucky man, Mark. Take care of her." And Mark had. He'd tried. He'd given her everything he had. But Bryan was also the man who had dated Emma first, before Mark, before the ring, before the promises. They'd dated for 2 years in college. Mark remembered watching them together, feeling that sharp pang of envy mixed with admiration. They'd seemed perfect, made for each other, the kind of couple that made everyone else feel like they were settling. Then Bryan got a job offer in Seattle. Emma was still in Boston. Long distance didn't work. They broke up. It was amicable, mature, the kind of breakup that everyone praises but nobody really wants. 2 years later, Mark ran into Emma at a coffee shop. They started talking, started dating. And somewhere along the line, he fell in love with the idea that maybe, just maybe, he'd won. He'd gotten the girl Bryan couldn't keep. Mark had always told himself it didn't matter. That was ancient history. Water under the bridge. Emma chose him. She said yes when he proposed. She walked down that aisle. She wore his ring. She took his name. But now, lying in the dark with those 5 words reverberating through his skull, those reassurances crumbled like ash in his hands. Had he ever really been her first choice? Or had he just been the safer option? The backup plan? The one who was there when Bryan wasn't? The guy who stayed because he had nowhere else to go? Second place. Runner-up. The consolation prize. The questions burned through him like acid, but he didn't move, didn't speak, didn't confront her. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling fans spinning in the darkness, listening to her breathing slow and deepen as she drifted off to sleep, watching the glow of her phone fade to black, and feeling something fundamental inside him crack. Not a clean break, not a dramatic explosion, just a hairline fracture that ran deep, deep down into the foundation of everything he'd built his life on. By morning, that crack had become a chasm. When Mark woke up, sunlight was streaming through the blinds, cutting harsh lines across the bedroom floor. For a split second, one blessed, ignorant second, everything felt normal. Then memory crashed back in like a wave. I should have married Bryan. He turned his head. Emma's side of the bed was empty, sheets pulled back, pillow still holding the impression of her head. From downstairs he could hear movement, the clink of mugs, the soft hum of her voice. She was humming, actually humming, like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just driven a knife through his chest while he slept beside her. Mark lay there for another minute, staring at the ceiling, trying to decide what to do. Confront her? Demand answers? Pack his bags and leave? Or pretend? Just pretend. Keep everything normal on the surface while his world collapsed underneath. He chose pretend. He got up, got dressed, and walked downstairs like it was any other Wednesday morning. Like his marriage wasn't bleeding out on the kitchen floor. Emma was at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. She looked radiant, happy. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she wore one of his old college t-shirts over leggings. The same outfit she'd worn 1,000 times before. But today, it looked different. Everything looked different now. "Morning, babe," she said cheerfully, turning to hand him a mug with that same easy smile she'd worn for 8 years. The smile that used to make him feel like the luckiest man alive. Now it felt like a lie. But Mark forced his face into something resembling normal. "Morning." He took the coffee, sipped it, tasted nothing. Emma leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone while she drank. Casual, relaxed, no guilt, no tells, nothing to suggest she'd whispered another man's name in the dark. Mark watched her over the rim of his mug, really watched her, the way she moved, the micro-expressions that flickered across her face, the way her thumbs moved across the screen, typing something, deleting it, typing again. "Who are you texting?" The question screamed in his mind, but he swallowed it down with another sip of coffee. Then it happened. A buzz, sharp and sudden in the quiet kitchen. Emma's phone lit up on the counter between them, and for just a second, one crucial, revealing second, Mark saw the name on the screen before she snatched it away. Bryan. His blood turned to ice, but his face stayed perfectly calm. He sipped his coffee, said nothing, just filed the observation away like a detective at a crime scene, cataloging evidence. "Work?" he asked casually. "Oh yeah, just my boss," she said, not meeting his eyes as she slipped the phone into her pocket. "Nothing important?" Lie number 1. Mark nodded, finished his coffee, kissed her on the cheek, quick, mechanical, the way she'd kissed him the night before, and headed to work. But his mind wasn't on work anymore. It was on her, on Bryan, on the name that had appeared on her screen, on the speed with which she'd hidden it. Over the next few days, Mark became someone he'd never been before. A detective in his own home, a spy in his own marriage. He started paying attention, real attention, to things he'd been too comfortable, too trusting, too naive to notice before. And once he started looking, he couldn't stop seeing. Emma started working late. Not once or twice, which was normal, but 3, 4, sometimes 5 times a week. She'd text him around 6, always apologetic. "So sorry, babe. Swamped at the office. Don't wait up for dinner." He'd check her company's website. No big projects, no deadlines, no reason for the sudden overtime. She bought a new perfume, something floral and expensive, nothing like the vanilla and jasmine scent she'd worn since they started dating. When he asked about it, she'd shrugged. Just felt like a change. But she only wore it when she was going out. Never at home, never for him. Her phone became an extension of her hand. She carried it everywhere. To the bathroom, to the kitchen, even to bed. It was always face down. Always locked. Always just out of reach. And whenever he walked into a room, whatever she'd been looking at disappeared. Screen flipped, app closed, phone pocketed. The kissing changed too. Not all at once, but gradually, like watching a fire die ember by ember. Her kisses became shorter, cooler, perfunctory. The kind of kiss you give someone out of obligation rather than affection. "Love you," she'd say as she left for work. But it sounded hollow, automatic. Like a recording played on loop so many times the words had lost all meaning. And the way she looked at him, or rather, didn't look at him, told Mark everything he needed to know. She was somewhere else. With someone else. Even when she was sitting right beside him on the couch, her body present but her mind 1,000 miles away. He could feel the distance growing between them like a physical thing, an invisible wall going up brick by brick, and he was on the outside, watching her seal herself away. Mark didn't confront her. Not yet. He wasn't ready. Or maybe he was afraid. afraid that once the words were spoken, once the accusation was made, there'd be no taking it back, no pretending, no more illusions of the life they'd built together. So he watched and waited, and the evidence piled up like bodies at a crime scene. One evening, they were on the couch together, the television playing some show neither of them cared about. White noise, background radiation for the silence that had crept into their marriage. Emma's phone buzzed on the cushion between them. She glanced at it. The briefest flicker of a smile crossed her face. Real, genuine, the kind of smile he used to inspire. And then she picked it up, typed something quick, and set it back down. Mark didn't ask, but inside his mind was screaming. What did he say? What did you reply? How long has this been going on? When did I lose you? Was I ever really yours to begin with? He felt like he was drowning in his own home, gasping for air while she sat beside him, humming along to a soundtrack she didn't even hear. Maybe it wasn't paranoia. Maybe it was proof. Maybe the worst part of betrayal isn't the discovery. It's the waiting, the knowing something is wrong, but not knowing how wrong. The watching someone you love slip away while you stand there, helpless, wondering if you ever really had them at all. Mark knew the truth. He just wasn't ready to face it yet. It was a Thursday evening when everything shifted from suspicion to certainty, when the knife that had been twisting slowly in Mark's gut finally plunged into the hilt. Emma came downstairs around 6:30, dressed in black leggings and a fitted purple jacket, the expensive one she'd bought last month with money from their joint account. Her hair was pulled back in a high ponytail, and she'd put on makeup. Not a lot, but enough. Enough to look good. Enough to impress someone. She grabbed her yoga mat from the hall closet, the one that never had dust on it anymore, and kissed him on the cheek. Quick, mechanical. The kind of kiss you give a roommate, not a husband. I'm heading to yoga with Claire, she said, already moving toward the door. I'll be back in a couple hours. Mark looked up from his laptop, forced a smile. Have fun. Thanks, babe. And she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving only the faint smell of that new perfume hanging in the air. Mark sat there for exactly 30 seconds, staring at the closed door. Then he grabbed his keys. He didn't plan it, didn't overthink it, didn't give himself time to second-guess or rationalize or talk himself out of it. He just moved, driven by instinct and heartbreak and the desperate, terrible need to know. He got in his car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway just in time to see her taillights turn right at the end of their street. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. His heart pounded in his chest like a war drum, each beat a countdown to something he couldn't take back. Part of him, the rational, civilized part, wanted to turn around, to go home, to trust his wife, to pretend this wasn't happening, to be the kind of man who didn't follow his wife through rain-slicked streets like some paranoid detective in a bad noir film. But he couldn't. He had to know. He kept his distance, 2 cars back, just close enough to keep her in sight. The rain had started, a cold November drizzle that blurred everything, turning streetlights into smeared halos and making the whole world look like it was melting. Emma's car didn't head toward the gym. Instead, she turned left on Maple, then right on Birch, winding through familiar streets that Mark knew by heart. They'd driven these roads together 100 times, 1,000 times. But tonight she was driving them alone, or so she thought. She pulled into the parking lot of Willow Cafe. Mark's stomach dropped. He knew this place. They used to come here on Saturday mornings, back when things were good, back when she smiled at him the way she smiled at her phone now. He parked across the street, tucked behind a row of cars under the shadow of an oak tree, and watched. The rain blurred his windshield, but he could see her through the cafe windows. Large, bright windows that framed her like a painting. A portrait of betrayal. She walked inside, scanning the room with purpose, looking for someone, and then her whole face changed. She lit up. Not the polite smile she gave him. Not the tired grin she offered after a long day at work. Not the obligatory affection of a woman going through the motions of a marriage. This was something else. Something raw and real and devastating. This was joy. Pure, unfiltered, undeniable joy. And then Mark saw him. Bryan. Tall, confident. Still handsome in that effortless way Mark had always envied. Same dark hair, same easy posture, same goddamn smile that used to make everyone in college gravitate toward him. He stood from a corner booth, arms open, and Emma, Mark's wife, the woman who'd promised to forsake all others, walked straight into them without hesitation. The hug lasted too long, way too long. The way she leaned into him, the way his hand rested on the small of her back, fingers spread possessively across the fabric of her jacket. None of it was friendly, none of it was innocent. It was familiar, intimate, natural, like they'd done it 1,000 times before, like they belonged to each other. They sat down across from each other in that corner booth, the same booth Mark and Emma used to sit in on Saturday mornings. And Mark watched as they talked, as they laughed, as they leaned in close, the way people do when they're sharing secrets, when they're in their own private world and nothing else exists. And Emma's hand reached across the table, slowly, deliberately, and touched Bryan's. And Bryan didn't pull away. He turned his hand over, palm up, and their fingers intertwined. Mark felt like he'd been punched in the chest. His breath caught, his vision blurred. The rain on the windshield mixed with something else, something hot trailing down his face that he refused to acknowledge. He wanted to storm inside, to flip that goddamn table, to scream at both of them, to make a scene, to hurt them the way they were hurting him. But he didn't. He just sat there in the rain, in the dark, in his car that smelled like the coffee he'd spilled that morning, watching his wife hold another man's hand. That was my wife's hand, he thought, the words echoing in his mind like a mantra. That's my wife, and she's giving him pieces of herself that she took back from me. They talked for an hour of smiles and laughter and touches, an hour of Mark's life evaporating into certainty and ruin. Finally, they stood. Another hug, longer this time. She pressed her face into his chest and his arms wrapped around her completely, holding her like she was something precious. She looked up at him. Mark could see her face in profile through the window, and she smiled. God, she smiled like Bryan was the only person in the world who mattered. Then they separated. Bryan walked to a black SUV, Emma got in her car, and she drove home, to Mark, to their house, to the lie they were still living. Mark waited 5 minutes before following, giving her time to get home first, to wash Bryan off her skin and out of her hair, to put her mask back on. When he walked through the door, she was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, legs tucked under her, looking perfectly calm, perfectly innocent. "How was yoga?" he asked, his voice steady despite everything. "Good," she said, not looking up, her thumb still moving across the screen. "Really good. Claire's really improving her poses." Another lie, piled on top of all the others. Mark nodded, walked to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of water, and felt the last piece of his heart, the part that had been holding out hope, that had been desperately clinging to the possibility that maybe he was wrong, maybe he was paranoid, maybe there was an explanation, turned to stone, cold, hard, unbreakable, because there was no going back from what he'd seen, no explaining it away, no pretending anymore. She'd made her choice, and it wasn't him. Mark didn't confront her that night, or the next day, or the day after that. He waited, he planned, he let the anger cool and crystallize into something sharper, something surgical, something that wouldn't explode in rage but would cut clean and precise, right down to the truth. 3 days later, he set the trap. He came home from work early, something he never did. He stopped at the Italian market on 5th Street and bought fresh pasta, San Marzano tomatoes, basil, garlic, and a bottle of Chianti. The good kind, the kind they used to drink when they were first dating, when money was tight, but everything tasted better because they were together. Back home, he cooked, really cooked. Not the quick, thrown-together dinners they'd been having for months, but the kind of meal that takes time and attention. He made sauce from scratch, slow-simmered with herbs. He rolled pasta dough by hand. He set the table with their wedding china, the set her mother had given them that they only used for special occasions. He lit candles, poured wine, made everything perfect. Emma walked in around 7, surprised to find him in the kitchen instead of at his desk. Her eyes widened when she saw the table. "What's all this?" she asked, cautious, like she was stepping into a trap, which in a way she was. "Just felt like doing something nice," Mark said, pulling out her chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We haven't had a real dinner together in a while." She hesitated, standing in the doorway, her purse still on her shoulder. For a moment, Mark thought she might refuse, might make an excuse, might run, but she didn't. She set down her bag, smoothed her skirt, and sat down. "This looks amazing," she said, and she almost sounded like she meant it. They ate in silence at first, the kind of comfortable quiet they used to share before everything went wrong. The clink of silverware on china, the soft hiss of the candles burning, the muted sounds of the neighborhood filtering through the windows. Emma complimented the pasta. Mark thanked her. They talked about the weather, about her day at work, the sanitized version he assumed with Bryan carefully edited out, about his project at the office, surface talk, safe talk, the kind of conversation you have with a stranger at a bus stop. And all the while, Mark watched her. The way she sipped her wine, the way she wouldn't quite meet his eyes, the way her fingers fidgeted with her napkin, folding and refolding it into increasingly smaller squares. She knew something was coming. She could feel it. Halfway through the meal, Mark set down his fork and leaned back in his chair. He took a slow sip of wine, let the silence stretch just a beat too long, and then said casually, "So, who's Bryan these days?" Emma froze. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth, hovering in mid-air like time itself had paused. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating. Color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug, leaving her pale and exposed. "What?" she stammered, the word barely a whisper. "Bryan," Mark repeated, his voice calm, even, almost friendly, like he was asking about the weather. "Your old boyfriend, my old roommate. Remember him? Best man at our wedding? Guy who dated you for 2 years before I did?" He took another sip of wine, letting each word land like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples of panic across her face. "I'm just curious how he's doing." She set her fork down slowly, carefully, like it was made of glass and might shatter. I don't know. I haven't talked to him in years." The lie came out too fast, too automatic, the kind of lie you've practiced in your head, prepared in advance for exactly this moment. Mark tilted his head, studying her. "Really?" "Yeah." She reached for her wine, but her hand was shaking. "Why are you asking about Bryan?" "Just wondering." He cut a piece of pasta, ate it slowly, making her wait, making her sweat. "It's funny, you know. I was thinking about him the other day, wondering whatever happened to him, where he ended up, whether he ever got married, whether he's happy." Emma's knuckles went white around her wine glass. "I wouldn't know." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "That's interesting, because friends don't usually hold hands in cafes." The room went silent. Not just quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that absorbs all sound, all breath, all life. The candles seemed to dim. The walls seemed to close in. Emma's face crumbled. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again, but no words came out. Just small, strangled sounds. Her eyes welled with tears that caught the candlelight and made them look like glass about to shatter. "Mark, don't." His voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath now, sharp and unyielding. "Don't lie to me again. Please, you've lied enough." She started crying, soft, shaking sobs that made her shoulders tremble. Real tears, Mark noted distantly. Not the performative kind. Actual grief. But grief for what? For getting caught? For hurting him? Or for having to choose? "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words broken and wet. "I'm so sorry. It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" She wiped at her eyes, smearing mascara. He's just a friend. We ran into each other a few weeks ago at the grocery store, and we started talking, and you've been seeing him ever since." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A fact laid bare on the table between them like a piece of evidence at trial. She didn't deny it. Couldn't deny it. The truth was written all over her face. "How long have you been lying to me?" Mark asked. "I wasn't lying. How long?" The hardness in his voice made her flinch. 6 weeks, she whispered. "We've been meeting for coffee. Catching up. That's all." "That's all." Mark laughed, but there was no humor in it. Just a hollow, bitter sound. "You meet your ex-boyfriend for coffee in secret. You lie to me about where you're going. You hold his hand. You smile at him the way you used to smile at me. And that's all? We're just friends. Friends don't do what you're doing." He leaned forward now, elbows on the table, eyes locked on hers. "Friends don't sneak around. Friends don't lie. And friends definitely don't whisper, 'I should have married Bryan,' in the middle of the night." Emma's face went from pale to gray. "You heard that?" "I heard that." She covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. "I didn't mean it. I was dreaming. I wasn't thinking. No." Mark's voice was quiet now, deadly quiet. "You were feeling. There's a difference. And what you felt, what you whispered in the dark when you thought I couldn't hear, that was the truth. Maybe the only truth you've told in weeks. Please, Mark, I don't want to lose you." "Then why are you with him?" "I'm not with him. We're just... Do you love him?" The question cut through her excuses like a knife. Emma went still. Her hands dropped from her face. She looked at him, tears streaming down her cheeks, and her mouth moved, but no sound came out. "Do you love him?" Mark asked again, slower this time, enunciating each word. "I don't know," she whispered. "Do you love me?" Silence. That silence was the loudest thing Mark had ever heard. louder than her whisper in the dark, louder than the lies, louder than the sound of his heart breaking in real time, because silence, in this case, was an answer. Emma looked down at her plate, at the pasta she'd barely touched, at the wine she couldn't drink, at the carefully set table that now felt like a crime scene. "He makes me feel seen again," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Like I matter, like I'm not just someone's wife or someone's routine, like I'm me, the me I was before." Mark felt the words cut through him, each one a blade finding the spaces between his ribs. But his face didn't change. His expression remained perfectly calm. "So I'm the routine," he said flatly. "And he's the excitement." "No, that's not." "Yes, it is." He stood up, pushing his chair back with a scrape that sounded too loud in the quiet. "That's exactly what it is. I'm the one who's here, who's always been here, who chose you every single day for 8 years. And he's the fantasy, the what if, the one who got away." "Mark, please." "You don't get to please me anymore." He walked to the sink, poured out his wine, watching the red liquid swirl down the drain like blood. "You don't get to have both of us. You don't get to keep me as your safety net while you explore whether the grass is greener with Bryan." He stood there with his back to her, staring at his reflection in the dark window above the sink. Behind him, Emma cried, pleaded, apologized, but he didn't turn around, because he'd already seen enough, and heard enough, and felt enough. The dinner, his carefully planned trap, had worked. He'd gotten his confession, his truth. Now he just had to decide what to do with it. That night, they didn't sleep in the same bed. Mark took the guest room. Emma stayed in their room, crying until the early hours of the morning. When dawn broke, she came downstairs. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her voice was hoarse. "Mark, please, can we talk?" He was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of cold coffee. "I don't want to lose you," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you, but I don't want to throw away 8 years. Mark looked up at her. "You already did." No, I didn't. I just got confused. You got confused?" His voice was sharper now. "You whispered his name in our bed. You lied to me. You held his hand. You smiled at him the way you used to smile at me. That's not confusion, Emma. That's a choice." She sank into the chair across from him, sobbing. "I don't know what I want." "Then figure it out." "Mark, no." He stood up, his voice calm but final. "I'm not going to beg you to choose me. I'm not going to compete with a memory or a fantasy or whatever the hell Bryan is to you. If you want him, go. If you want me, stay. But you don't get both." She stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what to do." Mark walked to the door, grabbed his jacket, and paused. "Then maybe you should figure that out somewhere else." He left, and when he came back that evening, her bags were packed by the door. The morning light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the living room. Emma stood by the door, her suitcase at her feet, her face pale and exhausted. "Please, Mark," she whispered. "Don't do this." Mark walked over to the mantel and picked up their wedding photo. The two of them, smiling, arms around each other, full of hope and promises. He handed it to her. "You whispered you should have married Bryan," he said, his voice steady, almost gentle. "So, maybe, you still can." Emma's face crumpled. "I didn't mean it. I was just—" "You meant it." He looked her in the eyes. "Maybe not consciously, maybe not intentionally, but you meant it, and now you have to live with it." She reached for him, but he stepped back. "Goodbye, Emma." She stood there for a long moment, tears streaming down her face, clutching the photo frame to her chest. Then slowly, she picked up her suitcase and walked out the door. Mark watched her car disappear down the street. Then he closed the door, and the house fell silent. The first few days were the hardest. The house felt too big, too quiet, too full of ghosts. Every corner held a memory. The couch where they used to watch movies together, her head on his shoulder, the kitchen where she'd danced while cooking breakfast on Sunday mornings, the bedroom where she'd whispered another man's name. Every room echoed with her absence. Her coffee mug still in the cabinet, her shampoo still in the shower, her handwriting on the calendar on the fridge, marking appointments she'd never keep. Mark would wake up in the middle of the night, reaching for her, and find only empty space and cold sheets. But slowly, so slowly he almost didn't notice, something shifted. The silence that had felt suffocating began to feel peaceful. The empty spaces began to feel like room to breathe. Mark started sleeping through the night. Really sleeping, not the restless half-sleep he'd had for months, always half aware of her beside him, always waiting for another whisper in the dark. He stopped checking his phone every 5 minutes, stopped wondering where she was or who she was with, stopped caring about the life she was living without him. He cleaned out the closet, boxing up her forgotten clothes. He rearranged the furniture. He repainted the guest room in a deep blue instead of the beige Emma had insisted on. He started running in the mornings. He read at night. He reconnected with old friends he'd neglected, accepted invitations he would have declined before, and for the first time in months, maybe years, he felt like he could breathe. Betrayal hurts. God, it hurts like nothing else. It carves out pieces of you and leaves holes you think will never fill, but it also frees you. It breaks the chains of a relationship that was already dying. It ends the pretending. It forces you to face the truth, that sometimes love isn't enough, that sometimes people grow apart, that sometimes the person you thought you'd spend forever with becomes a stranger who whispers someone else's name in the dark. 2 months after she left, an email appeared in his inbox. It was late, almost midnight. Mark was sitting on the couch, reading, when his laptop pinged. The sender, Emma. Mark stared at it for a long time before opening it. Mark, I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed to tell you something. You were right. About everything. Bryan wasn't the answer. He wasn't the excitement I thought he was. He was just a distraction, a fantasy. And when the fantasy became reality, when we actually tried to make it work, it fell apart in weeks. Because nostalgia and longing aren't the same as love. And chemistry isn't the same as compatibility. I thought he made me feel special, but he just made me feel temporary, like I was exciting because I was forbidden, because I was someone else's wife. Once I wasn't yours anymore, I wasn't exciting to him either. I realized what I'd lost, what I'd thrown away for a feeling that evaporated the moment I tried to hold on to it. I lost the only man who truly loved me, the only man who saw me, all of me, and chose to stay, every single day, until I gave him no choice but to leave. I don't know what I expected to find with Bryan, but whatever it wasn't real, and now I'm left with nothing but regret and the memory of the life I destroyed. I hope you're doing okay. I hope you're happy. You deserve that. I'm sorry for everything. For the lies, for the betrayal, for the whisper you weren't supposed to hear. You weren't second choice, Mark. You were the choice, the right choice. I was just too stupid to realize it until it was too late. Emma Mark read the email twice, then a third time. He waited for something, anger, maybe, or satisfaction, or the urge to reply with something cutting and final. But he felt nothing. Just a distant pity for the woman who'd written those words, for the person who'd traded substance for fantasy and found herself with neither. He closed his laptop, stood up, walked outside onto the back porch into the cool night air, and looked up at the stars. The world felt wide and open, full of possibility. He took a deep breath and let it out slowly. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone who betrayed you is let them live with the choice they made, not out of cruelty, not out of revenge, but because some lessons can only be learned alone. Some consequences can't be undone. Some bridges, once burned, can't be rebuilt. Mark didn't reply to the email. He just deleted it and went back inside to finish his book. Because for the first time in a long time, Mark felt free. Free from the lies. Free from the wondering. Free from loving someone who loved someone else. Free to be himself. To build a life that was his own. To find someone someday who would whisper his name in the dark and mean it.